It all began with an unexpected crash. My wife, Lily, and our 2 kids were heading off to a ski resort for a week-long vacation. I was supposed to join them later, flying in via a chartered helicopter from a business trip. The plan was simple, like all good plans seen before the chaos. The day started with promise. Lily sent me a picture of the kids bundled up in their ski gear, grinning in the back seat of our SUV. "Can't wait to see you," she texted. But that was hours before the storm rolled in. The helicopter never made it. Mid-flight, an engine failure forced an emergency landing in the dense wilderness. News outlets covered it extensively. "Crash in the Rockies," they called it. Everyone thought I was dead. I wasn't. Survival was the only thing on my mind during the first 2 days after the crash. My leg was bruised, and my ribs ached with every breath. The helicopter had landed awkwardly on a rocky slope, its tail shattered. I managed to crawl into a makeshift shelter, using wreckage to shield myself from the biting cold. By the time the rescue team found me on the 3rd day, my hands were numb, and my mind was equally frozen, consumed by fear for my family. They thought I was dead. What had Lily told the kids? Had she been able to bear the weight of explaining that Daddy wasn't coming home? The thought haunted me. Back at the hospital, I had no phone, lost in the wreck, and no way to reach anyone directly. Instead, I relied on a nurse to place the call to Lily. I remember her dialing the number and handing me the receiver with a soft smile. When Lily answered, her voice was bright, almost cheerful. "Oh my God, you're alive," she exclaimed, her words tumbling out like water. I wanted to believe her. But something about the way she said it felt practiced. Like she'd already rehearsed this reaction in her head. It wasn't grief morphing into relief, it was a surprise act, her timing just slightly off. I tried to brush the thought away, chalking it up to the trauma I'd been through. "Yeah," I croaked. My throat was raw, my voice barely audible. "I'm here. They got me out." She said all the right things, she was so relieved, the kids would be overjoyed, she couldn't wait to see me. But the cheerfulness lingered in her voice a beat too long, like a shadow of something I couldn't yet name. When the call ended, the nurse asked if I was okay. I nodded, but a nagging discomfort crept into the back of my mind. It wasn't just how Lily sounded. It was the way she hadn't asked the questions I expected. "Are you hurt? What happened? When are you coming home?" She hadn't even hesitated before saying, "Of course, I'll pick you up." Lily picked me up from the hospital 3 days later. The kids weren't with her, she'd left them with her sister, citing the chaos of everything. It made sense, but I still felt a pang. I'd imagined their arms around me, their voices asking endless questions about the crash. Instead, it was just Lily, waiting for me in the hospital parking lot. She looked stunning, as always. Her blonde hair shone in the late afternoon sun, her makeup flawless, her coat tailored perfectly. But it struck me as odd, she looked like she was headed to a dinner party, not picking up her husband who just survived a crash. When she saw me, she ran to hug me, wrapping her arms tightly around my neck. It felt warm, familiar, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "I thought I'd lost you," she said, her voice trembling just enough to be convincing. But there were no tears in her eyes. "I'm here," I said, trying to believe in the relief she was offering me. On the drive home, she kept the conversation light, too light. She talked about how the kids were adjusting, how my parents had been informed of my survival, and even about a movie she and the kids had watched the night before. She didn't ask about the crash, about what I'd been through, or how I was holding up. When we pulled into the driveway, I noticed a small detail that seemed out of place. The porch light had been replaced, it was brighter, sleeker, not the old yellow bulb we'd been meaning to change for months. The flower pots had been rearranged, too, and the wreath on the door was different. Inside, things felt even stranger. There were new throw pillows on the couch, and a sleek coffee maker sat on the counter where the old drip machine used to be. A subtle change in the air, a faint trace of cologne or aftershave I didn't recognize, clung to the living room. "Did you redecorate while I was gone?" I asked, half joking, as I lowered myself onto the couch. My leg was still stiff from the crash, and the hospital's food hadn't done much to help my energy levels. Lily laughed lightly. "I thought a fresh start would be nice. The kids and I just needed something to keep us distracted." It sounded reasonable, but it didn't feel right. She sat down beside me, her hand brushing mine. "I'm just so glad you're here," she said softly. Her eyes met mine, but there was something beneath the surface. A flicker of guilt, maybe? Or fear? I couldn't put my finger on it, but it sat heavy in my chest, gnawing at me as she smiled, kissed me on the cheek, and went to the kitchen to make tea. I looked around the room again. The new coffee maker, the perfectly arranged throw pillows, the faint scent that didn't belong to me. My stomach churned, and I knew this wasn't the homecoming I'd imagined. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. The house was silent, but something had pulled me from sleep. For a moment, I just lay there, listening to the hum of the heater and the faint creak of the floorboards as the house settled. Then I realized Lily wasn't in bed. The sheets on her side were cold. I sat up, the dull ache in my ribs flaring as I swung my legs over the edge of the bed. My heart pounded, not from fear but from a strange sense of unease. I found her in the living room, sitting on the couch with her laptop open. The screen cast an eerie blue light over her face, and her fingers flew across the keyboard as if she didn't want to waste a second. She didn't hear me at first, and I stood there in the shadows, watching her. She was smiling. Not the soft, tender smile I knew so well, but something sharper, more private. It was the kind of smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice rough from sleep. She jumped, slamming the laptop shut so quickly it was almost comical. "You scared me," she said, her laugh nervous. "I couldn't sleep, so I was just catching up on emails." "At 2 in the morning?" "I've been so behind," she said, brushing her hair back as if that could smooth over the tension between us. "Work doesn't stop just because life throws us a curveball." I nodded slowly, not wanting to press the issue. "You should get some rest," I said. She hesitated, then nodded. "You're right. Coming. In a minute." I watched her retreat to the bedroom, her footsteps too quick for someone supposedly exhausted. When I was sure she was gone, I stepped to the couch and opened her laptop. It was locked. That wasn't unusual, but it struck me as strange. We'd never been the kind of couple to keep passwords from each other. I knew hers, at least, I used to. When I tried the old one, the computer buzzed in rejection. The unease I'd been feeling all day crept back, stronger now. The next morning, I told myself I was overthinking it. Lily was probably just trying to stay on top of things, coping in her own way after believing I was gone. But the doubts clung to me like shadows, and I couldn't shake them. Later, as I unpacked my bag from the hospital, I found Lily's phone charging in the kitchen. I hesitated before picking it up. We'd always trusted each other, hadn't we? But as I unlocked her phone using the code I remembered, thankfully unchanged, what I found made my blood run cold. There were messages. Dozens of them, buried under the name Kelly in her contacts. But these weren't from Kelly. "Last night was incredible. I can't wait to see you again. When is he coming home?" I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. The last message was from 2 days ago, while I was still in the hospital. This couldn't be real. Not Lily. Not my wife, the woman I'd trusted with everything. But the evidence was there, glowing in my hand, undeniable. The messages were a blow to the chest, heavier than the helicopter crash had ever felt. For a few minutes, I just sat there at the kitchen table, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It didn't add up. It couldn't. This wasn't the Lily I knew, the woman who'd stood by me through years of struggle, who had laughed with me over shared dreams, who had promised me forever. But then I thought about the new coffee maker. The pillows. The porch light. The late-night typing on her laptop. Pieces of the puzzle I'd been trying to ignore began to click into place. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't deny it anymore. The sound of the shower running snapped me back to the present. Lily was in the bathroom, getting ready for the day. For a moment, I debated waiting, pretending I hadn't seen anything. But the messages burned in my mind. I stood, phone still in hand, and walked down the hallway. My reflection in the bathroom mirror startled me as I approached the door, wild-eyed, disheveled, still marked by the bruises of survival. I barely recognized myself. The door was slightly ajar, steam curling out into the hall. I pushed it open. "Lily," I said, my voice low and even. She jumped slightly, pulling the shower curtain halfway back. "You scared me," she said with a nervous laugh. "What's up?" I held up the phone. "Who's Kelly?" The color drained from her face so quickly it was almost impressive. Her hand tightened on the curtain, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. Finally, she managed to stammer, What are you talking about?" "Don't lie to me, Lily." My voice cracked, raw with the weight of everything I was holding back. I stepped closer, holding out the phone. "These messages. Who are they really from?" Her eyes darted to the phone, then back to me. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally said, "It's not what you think." "It never is it?" My voice rose despite myself. "You were texting him while I was in the hospital, Lily. While I was lying there, thinking about how much I missed you and the kids, thinking I might never see you again." Her lip trembled, and she turned away, grabbing a towel to cover herself. "I didn't know if you were alive," she said finally, her voice shaking. "I didn't know how to handle it. I was scared. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" The word tasted bitter in my mouth. "You didn't accidentally send those texts, Lily. You didn't just trip and fall into someone else's bed." She turned to face me then, her eyes glistening with tears. "I thought you were dead," she said, her voice breaking. "I was grieving. And he was there. I didn't know what else to do." I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. Part of me wanted to believe her, to forgive her, to chalk it up to a moment of weakness born from tragedy. But then I thought about the timeline, about the messages from before I'd even been found. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What? How long has this been going on?" Her silence was answer enough. Her silence filled the room like a deafening roar. I waited, the seconds stretching into what felt like hours, until she finally lowered her eyes. 6 months, she admitted, her voice barely audible. The weight of her words hit me harder than the crash ever could. 6 months. Half a year of lies, stolen moments, and betrayal, all happening under my nose while I thought we were building a life together. I took a step back, leaning against the sink for support. 6 months, I repeated, the words tasting foreign in my mouth. "While I was working late, trying to give you and the kids everything, this is what you were doing." Her tears fell freely now, but they didn't move me. I felt hollow, numb. "It wasn't like that," she pleaded. "I didn't mean for it to happen. It got out of control." "Out of control?" I snapped. "You had control every step of the way, Lily. Every text. Every time you met him. Every lie you told me." She sank onto the edge of the bathtub, burying her face in her hands. "I thought you were dead," she said again, her voice muffled. "But I wasn't dead, Lily," I said, my voice rising. "And you started this long before the crash." So don't stand there and pretend this was about grief. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't mean to hurt you. Hurt me? I thought. She hadn't just hurt me, she'd dismantled everything we'd built together, piece by piece, and left it in ruins. Who is he? I asked, my voice hard. Her lips parted as if to answer, but she hesitated, her eyes darting to the door as though she expected him to walk through at any moment. Finally, she whispered his name, and it felt like the last nail in the coffin of my trust. It wasn't just anyone. It was someone we both knew. Someone who'd been in our home, laughed at our table, and pretended to be my friend. Eric, she said, her voice trembling. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Eric was one of my oldest friends, a guy I'd trusted implicitly. We'd gone on fishing trips together, celebrated birthdays, even toasted to each other's successes. And now, he was the one who had destroyed my marriage from the inside. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Eric. Of course, it's Eric. How long has he been sneaking into my house while I was out working, Lily? Or was it just easier for you to go to him? It wasn't like that, she pleaded. He was there for me when I felt alone. You were always at work, always focused on something else. I didn't plan for this to happen. Don't you dare put this on me, I said, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. I was working to give you and the kids the life you wanted. I thought we were a team, Lily. While I was breaking my back, you were. God, I can't even say it. She flinched at my words, her tears falling faster now. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she sobbed. I didn't think. No, I interrupted, stepping closer. You didn't think. You didn't think about me, about the kids, about anything other than your selfish little fling. The room fell silent. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. I looked at her, this woman I thought I knew, and saw a stranger. Finally, I straightened, forcing myself to take a step back. You need to leave, I said, my voice cold and final. What? She gasped, looking up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. You heard me, I said. Pack your things and go. I need time to think. To figure out what the hell I'm going to do now. Lily didn't move at first, staring at me like she couldn't believe what I'd said. You don't mean that, she whispered, her voice breaking. I do, I said, more firmly this time. Go to your sister's. Take a few days. I need space. Her lip quivered, but she stood slowly, brushing past me to the bedroom. I followed her, leaning against the doorframe as she opened a suitcase and began packing. She didn't look at me, and I didn't offer her any comfort. As she folded clothes into neat stacks, I caught glimpses of the woman I'd once loved, the way her hands moved with precision, the little frown she made when concentrating. But those moments felt like a lifetime ago, and every time I softened, the texts and the name Eric snapped me back to reality. You can see the kids, I said finally, breaking the heavy silence. I'll figure out a schedule. But right now, I can't even look at you. She froze, her hands gripping a sweater tightly. Do you really hate me that much? I don't know what I feel, I admitted. But whatever this is, it's not something we can come back from. She zipped the suitcase with trembling hands and turned to face me. I never stopped loving you, she said, her voice small. Even when things got complicated, I still loved you. Funny way of showing it, I said, bitterness dripping from my words. She didn't respond. She hoisted the suitcase off the bed, her shoulders slumping under its weight. At the door, she paused, looking back at me one last time. I'm sorry, she said softly. I didn't answer. I couldn't. That night, the house felt emptier than it ever had. The silence was deafening, every creak and groan of the floorboards a reminder of what had just happened. I wandered from room to room, trying to convince myself I'd done the right thing. In the living room, I stopped in front of the coffee maker, the shiny, sleek one I'd barely noticed before. It stood out now, a glaring symbol of the life that had been moving on without me, a life I hadn't even realized I wasn't a part of anymore. The next morning, I woke up to a house that didn't feel like mine anymore. The kids were still at Lily's sister's place, and the quiet felt oppressive. Every corner of the house seemed tainted, by the secrets, by the lies, by Eric. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at Lily's phone. I hadn't returned it to her the night before, and now it felt like the key to uncovering everything. I scrolled through the messages again, reading each one carefully. There were no explicit plans spelled out in the texts, but the intimacy was undeniable. The way they talked, the way they joked, it wasn't just physical. They'd built a connection, something that felt like a betrayal on every level. I needed answers. Real answers. If there was any chance of moving forward, I had to know the full truth. That afternoon, I made a call to a private investigator. His name was Mark, a no-nonsense guy with a reputation for being thorough. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and I laid everything out for him, Lily, Eric, the messages, the months of lies. I need to know everything, I told him. How long it's been going on, where they've been, who knew. Mark nodded, taking notes on a small pad. Do you want me to confront them? No, I said firmly. I'll handle that when the time comes. For now, just get me the facts. As we shook hands, I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time since the crash, I felt like I had a sliver of control. Back at the house, I started making a list of everything I needed to do. The first item was practical: protect myself legally. I called a lawyer to discuss custody, the house, and what a divorce might look like. The second item was more personal. I wanted Eric to feel the weight of what he'd done. Not just to me, but to my family. And then there was Lily. Part of me still wanted to understand how she'd let this happen. But another part, one that was growing louder by the day, wanted her to feel what I was feeling. I didn't know what revenge would look like yet, but the seed was planted. The days that followed were a blur of planning and quiet rage. Mark worked quickly, updating me with detailed reports every evening. Each new piece of information felt like another crack in the foundation of the life I thought I had. Eric and Lily had started their affair 7 months ago, long before the crash. They met at our neighborhood bar, the one we used to frequent together before the kids. From there, it escalated: secret lunches, stolen weekends, and even nights spent in our house when I was away on business. Mark had photos, receipts, and even security footage from Eric's office building. He was meticulous, giving me everything I needed to confront them both. That Friday, I finally had the kids back home. Seeing their smiles eased some of the tension in my chest, but the questions they asked: where's mommy? When's she coming home? Cut deeper than I expected. She's staying with Aunt Rachel for a little while, I said, keeping my tone steady. But we'll see her soon. It wasn't a lie, not entirely. I'd arranged to meet Lily the next morning, under the pretense of discussing custody arrangements. What she didn't know was that Eric would be there too. The meeting took place at a neutral location, an empty office space owned by Mark's firm. When Lily arrived, she looked nervous but composed, her hair pulled back neatly, her makeup light. "What's this about?" she asked as she sat down. Before I could answer, Eric walked in. Her face drained of color instantly. She turned to me, her voice sharp. "What is this?" "This," I said, pulling out the folder Mark had prepared, "is the truth. Your truth." I placed the folder on the table, sliding it toward her. Eric stood frozen, his eyes darting between me and Lily. He didn't sit down. "I know everything," I continued, my voice calm but firm. "The texts, the weekends, the lies. I know about the bar, the office, and the fact that you used our house." Lily's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Photos spilled out, her and Eric at a hotel, laughing at a cafe, walking hand in hand down a street. Her breathing quickened, and she shot a panicked glance at Eric. "You told him," she hissed. "I didn't," Eric stammered, his face pale. "I don't need either of you to tell me anything," I said, cutting in. "I have everything I need right here. And now, so do you." I slid a second folder across the table. This one held legal documents, divorce papers, custody arrangements, and a list of conditions that left no room for negotiation. "Sign them," I said, my voice low. Lily opened her mouth to protest, but I didn't give her the chance. "You don't get to explain this away. You don't get to plead or make excuses. This is the end, Lily. The only thing left is how cleanly we do this." Her hands shook as she flipped through the papers. Eric stood silently, his mouth opening and closing like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. "Why are you doing this?" Lily asked finally, her voice breaking. "Because," I said, meeting her tear-filled eyes, "you made your choice. Now I'm making mine." That night, after it was all over, I sat in the silence of the house and let myself feel everything. The anger, the betrayal, the grief. But as the hours passed, something else crept in, a sense of relief. The life I thought I'd built was gone, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. From the ashes of what they'd destroyed, I could start again. And this time, it would be on my terms.